the selected areas, selected policies are needed for the implementation of the legally approved. But we know, I am not going to detail out everything, but we know in the education policy or any policies, as I said, the base should be based on the constitutional provision, and also in the government commitment should be there. And also we have to, any country or any system need to have some main goals and the priorities in particular sectors. And the education policy may be in the, should be in the broader statement, and also it may be in the sector specific or the subsector specific one. To achieve the policies, we need to have identify the strategies. The strategies identify each sector. For example, in the education, we need to set the direction for achieving educational goals and the priorities set by the policies. And also need to clearly identify the roles and the responsibilities of the stakeholders, implementers, or the technocrats of the system. And to achieve the strategies, we need to have the strong roadmap with the time bound and the specific targets and the outputs we need to identify, and also need to allocate or invest for the resources required to implementation of these policies strategy. Why we are need to the education or any subsector policies? For example, education is the key counterpart for the national development, the nation building. The nation buildings cannot be done in isolation. There should be the different component, different subsectors to contribute the nation development or the national development. For example, economic, the human resource, social, and the political sectors are inner circle component of the national development. And also education, industry, health, and the environmental, infrastructure, etc. Those are the subsectors contribute to the national development in many countries. In terms of having this background, the education policies we can define as an explicit or implicit single decision or the group of decision which may present directive for the guiding future decision. Having said that, we need to have the framework and also education planning perspectives and the principles, government policies, and the governance for system for the service delivery. When we are talking about the policy making perspective, in the theoretically, there are several dimensions or modes we are following for the policy making. This is with particular education sector, internationally accepted policy making modes are the we call in the very technical jargon the synoptic model or the organizational or bureaucrats model and the personalist model and also incremental models like that. These are the accepted in the many countries. They are following one of these mode. In Sri Lankan context, we are in the chiefly about the bureaucrats mode as well as the personalistic mode we are following for the policy making. In addition to that, we also follow the ad hoc mode policy making and the garbage can model like that. And also in the bottom-up policy making approach we are following for the formulation of education policies when we are studying in the historical background. But why policies? Basis of the origination of the policies. There are several directives becoming for the formulation of policies. Some policies emerge due to the government policy directives. That's the government decide what to do for the education sector, what is the goal of education sector like that. And also mismatch, there are some mismatch. For example, Western provinces having the larger contribution for the human resource development, but some provinces are less contribution for the human development. Therefore, the government are mandated to maintain the balanced regional development of the country, including education. Therefore, they are following some strategies to maintain the regional balance of the country. Therefore, having said that, the government are decided what policies to be matched with the system. And other policies, some of the policies emerge due to the demand-driven policies. For example, in the poverty reduction and also in the youth unrest, we have some experience in the 1971. The youth unrest took place in the country. Based on the 1971 struggle, the 17th government, they took initiative to the 1972 reforms. And also after 1988 and 89, there are some youth unrest again. Based on that particular situation, and the then government took action to establish in the Youth Unrest Commission. The Youth Unrest Commission recommended to establish in the NEC for the formulation of education policies. And also another policies are emerged due to the supply-driven policies. For example, in the preschool uniform materials in 1993 government, the then president decided to provide the preschool uniform materials to the school. You can have a look at in the MDD Piri's autobiography. They said in the how the policies are emerged without in any rationale or any justification or any policy analysis. That is the political intention. And also in the pre-textbooks, providing pre-textbooks, those are the supply-driven policies. In terms of the poorest household perspective, those are good policies. But in terms of the economic perspective in any countries, it is the challenging process, because even in the present government and the last several government, they are facing challenges to allocate the given allocation for the continuation of these policies. And also further, there are some policies, emerging policies, disaster management after the tsunami and also other natural the disasters and the child labor issue like that. Those are the emerging policies we incorporate in the education sector. Some policies emerge due to the operational policies. For example, in the school financing, teacher deployment and the teacher transfers, school admission, admission for the National College of Education, the university entrance like that. And as I said earlier, we are in the global arena. We have to adhere for the international goals. We are agreeing as a country. We are agreeing for the achieving in the international goals like SDG or EFA or MDG like that. So the reason, in terms of the economic perspective, for a recent example, we are experiencing the IMF condition. We can't deviate it from the IMF condition. We have to adhere like that. It is simply apply for the education or the same situation. When the formulation, the policies, we need to have the policy development and the organization like that. I am not going to read out everything, but this is the conceptual framework for the policy analysis or the policy formulation. The policy formulation, there are several aspects we need to consider in the strategic thinking and the development of priorities and the implementation perspectives and the maintenance of the sustainability of the policies. We are challenging, we are facing in the very crucial, in the critical situation to the maintain or the sustainability of the policies. We can develop very nicely and the very, the attractive policies, but the challenge is the implementation and the sustainability of the policy. And also when we are studying in this study, we consult in the national, province, subnational and the university level and the implementation level, different stakeholders. We gather their opinions and their opinion, perspectives like that. Based on this policy analysis, we can see in the several milestones. We know in the 1939, in the education ordinance is the base. Then after that, there are several amendment took place in the 1947, 51, 53 and the 58 and also the 1978 Constitution and the 1987 13th Amendment. But after that, there is no any legal provision for the implementation of the education policies. In 2019 drafted Education Act, but it was not taken in place. But in the meantime, there are several steps taken to formulation of education policies and the Education Act, but not implemented fully in the system. And also when we are international charters and the convention and the declaration from 1948 to 2018, there are several convention and agreement like the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and also in the Child Rights and the World Declaration of EFA, ESDG, Nandi Declaration and the Commonwealth like that, UN charters like that. Those are incorporated into the education policies and the policy framework in the country. And when we are looking at the education policies, the 1939, as I said in the Education Ordinance, 1945, the pre-education policy, 1950, there was taking some educational changes. We know in the 1950s if the language issue took place in the country, and the 1962-61 education changes, and 66 general education and the tertiary education reforms taking place, and also 1972 education reforms, 77, 78 education changes after the new government in 1977, and the 81 in the education white paper, 87 in the 13th Amendment, 91 NEC report. This NEC report is actually in the thoroughly consulting all the stakeholders in the education sectors in different levels. The rural areas, in the plantation areas, in the urban areas, different education academia, and also in the many stakeholders contributed for the 1991 NEC report. And based on the 1991 NEC report, 97 education reforms introduced in the system. And after that, 2003, 2012, 2016, 2019, 2020, those are proposed by the NEC, but any of these policies not approved by the legislative bodies in the country. Those are the proposals. Those are some recommendations. But even though they are not receiving any legally approved for this proposal, but they implemented some component through the ministry's powers. The ministry portfolio given some powers and authorities through the cabinet. They implemented some initiatives, and also in the development partners, they took. They picked some key recommendation and they implemented through their development projects. And the 2019 and the 2022 and 2023, there are 3 reports produced by one report produced by the NEC, one from the Presidential Secretariat, and another one from the Ministry of Education. But all the reports, all the proposals are for the education sector. But we are failure to have the one single proposal to produce for the education sector. But we are working, we are talking about the education. We cannot sit together. We are not in the same page. We are having in the different agendas in the system in terms of the implementation, even for the formulation stage. Today, the current government, the last year, the presidential election manifesto, very recently I saw it is converted as the policy framework in the country. The election presidential manifestos given some areas to identify the education sector policy concerns. When we are looking at the different education policy from 1945 to the 2023, the many of policies are emerged. I mean, the underlying rationale for the policies for the government policies or the political directive. Very few of them, for example, 1945 education policies purely, I mean, the social demand, based on the social demand, and also they consider for the country's need requirement. They follow then the scientific way they consult in the sector diagnosis and the policy analysis, policy consultation, policy communication, like that. Every step they follow the Kannangara situation. Even in the today, we are considered as the handbook for the pre-education policy. It also, there are some evidence in the Supreme Court also given some judgment ensuring in the pre-education policy. This is the only one. We do have the legislative approved in the policies, but many of them, for example, in the 1972 policy reforms, that is actually based on the social demand, as I said earlier, but they are prominent for the political involvement, and the political directives are there. And even after that, 1981 education white paper, that is, after then opened economic policy in the country, 1977, the political leaders declare in the country is adopting in the economic policy, open economic policy. Based on the neoliberal concept, the education policy is converted in line with the liberal policy, liberal economic policy. They think the education is the marketized. The earlier they consider as the quasi-market features of the education. The later on they establish the pure market aspect in the education. After that, then the political authorities interfere for even in the operational policy, teacher transfers, student admission, and etc. etc. Even in the provision of the educational facilities for the schools, like that. Those are some features we can see in terms of the education policy formulation. But the NEC reports NEC is the mandatory body formulation of the education policies, and they submit their proposal to the head of the country, that means the president. The president is given some directive with the approval of the cabinet and the parliament. President directed the Ministry of Education to implement or identify what are the implementation of the which policies is suitable to the countries in line with the government policy directive. But we can see the many events, many years, many proposals are following in the different ways. But there is no any coherent or the scientific manner for the from formulation to implementation of policies in the country. And based on the analysis, the keynote of education policies, all policies are talking about the equity and inclusiveness, quality, relevance, and the efficiency. Those are the key pillars from Kannangara to today. We are talking, but in terms of the equity, we can't achieve in the 100% equity. Equity is the ideal situation, but the government are trying to have minimize the gap of the equity. For that purpose, we introduce and continuation of the fee-free education, and also to support that the education subsidies programs are implemented. Some education subsidy programs like as I said in the pre-textbooks or the pre-school uniform, a napkin for the girls, like that, those are not actually based on the pure demand of the society. Those are in the politically intentions are there. There is no any rationale or no any justification. There is no any studies for the financial feasibilities and the economical affordability of the sustainability of such policies. resourcing schools. Even in the resourcing schools, some schools are richer, some schools are poor. There are some vast disparities in terms of the resourcing school. But every parents, every education policymakers and the technocrats, they are willing to have the same output from the students. But the treatments are two different ways. But any parents in the Ua province, in the Monaragala or the Colombo 7, the same ambitious, because the education is only the social mobility factor to address in the poverty of when we need to have the deviating from the poverty, education is the tool for that purpose. And also in terms of the quality curriculum, language, the teacher matters, assessment, etc. Every policies have discussed, and some years, some initiatives are continued, some are with the minor, the very few correction or the very few amendment. Some are continuation, some policies may be in the cut and paste policies. Some we are prepared to, even not only the education sector, we are other sectors also. We call in the, some popular policies are taking places. The fix approach we are following, not the addressing for the real situation in the real problem in the country. And with regard to the relevance, we talking about from Kannagara to today, the world of work, the linking for the labor market. But still, we are talking about the mismatch between the economic and the education. Many people are saying in the education is not catering for the labor market demand for even in the local, the country labor market as well as the international labor market. There are some gaps they are highlighting. But the education reforms are, in the previous education, many reforms are they introduced in the many avenues for the students, but not really, it is not the reality of the ground level. And the governance perspective, service delivery perspective, the governance and the decentralized system we introduced in the 1960s, some elements. After the 1987, the education system is the decentralized. But even in today, many decisions are taken by the center, and they are giving the instructions to the implementation level. For example, in the school-based management, or the giving some decision-making powers and authority to the school level, but the decisions are taken from the center and given some instruction. But there are some disparities or the implementation perspective. With regard to the politics and the policy making and policies, as I already discussed about this in the 1972, 81, 97, 92, those are actually, the politicians are mandated to the making policies. But the problem is the involvement of the party politics. For example, in the party politics, after as I said in the 1977, the introducing of open economic perspective, the party politics are involving for the education development, implementation, and the provision of resources. And also the two national language policy, bilingual policy, and also in the school development, very earlier introducing the ISD program for the school development, and then a BSD, the Navodaya, Isuru, 1000 school program, nearest school program, then increasing number of national, etc. There are a number of initiatives introduced in the system without policy analysis, without identifying what are the strengths and weaknesses and the impact of the policies implemented. But this was happened actually due to the political agendas. Even in the politically ministers change, there are some policies are implemented, some are stopped like that. For example, in the 1972 introduced in the HNC and NCG exam, after the 1977 the government became the power, they abolished in the previous assessment system and they go back to the GC O-level and A-level system. But the some subject development like social study, expansion of the science education, they continue based on the 1972 reforms initiative. Those are actually I discussed. And for example, in the development partners involvement, in the education policy reforms or the policy formulation expected, several components introduced through the development partners. For example, in the primary education, earlier in the education budget considered as the one education budget, after the intervention of the development partners in intervention, the education budget divided into the primary and secondary, both national and the provincial level. Then after in 2000, early 2000 and the 2004-5 like that, in the education sector-wide approach for the planning and the implementation perspective, this was based on the Paris Declaration in the 1999. And also in the out-of-reach school children, school-based management system, school-based teacher development, school library, school finances system, and the child-friendly school, and the social cohesion. There are several components implementing and also incorporating the education policies and the planning perspective. Those are emerged, those are introduced as a result of the development partners' involvement. But when we are talking about the citizenship education and the civil society's involvement, many education policy initiatives, there are very little, the very limited spaces are allocated for the adhering or for the listen to the civil society's voices. Anyway, there are some positive features there are. As everyone in this house knows, we are, as I earlier said also, in terms of educational attainment, the birth rate and the infant mortality rates, human development index, life of birth, like that, etc. Many indicators show the we are in the good, the remarkable the level of the educational development. But this is the less GDP contribution, but high educational attainment. This is the international lesson to the countries. But there are some component missing part in the household expenditure component. But any studies are not done calculation or the computation of the household contribution. But we are talking about the GDP. GDP is the OECD average. In the many countries are allocating from 4% to 6%. But like our countries, considering in the economic situation in the country, we are not in a position to allocate 4% or the 6% of the education from the GDP contribution. But there are some positive features. I saw in the yesterday parliamentary debate or the Honorable Minister saying we are gradually moving to the for that target of the OECD international benchmark also. But anyway, we are facing some challenges, mismatch between the education and the other subsectors, because the education sector cannot be survive in isolation. This is the we need to have some incorporation of the other subsectors and the other sectors, and also in the education policies, reform should be in the part and the parcel of the social reforms, and also policies. Not only the education policies, any policies or the reforms cannot be implemented in overnight. It takes some reasonable period. And also because we are working with we are dealing with the human. Our intention, our ambitions and our expectations are varied. But it is very difficult to satisfy every person who are the concern about the education. They are interested for the education. Their involvement also in different phase, and also need to provide resources and facilities to implement the education policies, and very crucial, the very important one, the wider participation. Everyone should be in one page. Everyone should be talking about the one language in terms of the education policies and implementation. But even though we are having in the different ideologies in terms of the politically, maybe in the social perspective, but we in terms of the education development, we need to have some one language, one technical terms we need to use. But currently we are in the lack of poor consultation and the poor policy communication. And because the education cater for every citizen in the country is running based on the poorest people's tax. I mean, the indirect tax, especially the direct taxpayers are paying in the very rarely, because they know how to avoid from the paying the taxes, and every tax companies also they are cater for the direct taxpayers. But even in the poorest people, they are day-to-day communities, they are paying in the indirect taxes. Indirect taxes are, I mean, even direct taxes also, but those are the main revenues for the education, social sectors development. But we are not communicated with the real beneficiaries of the system, because they are having some right to know what is happening in the countries, what is happening in the system. But they should be aware in the responsibility of the policymakers and the technocrats to aware. But the other one is the lack of champion for the implementation of the policies, and also in the community involvement like you in the civil society. And also in the absence of the systematic and the sustainable monitoring system. Even in the, for example, NEC can formulate in the policy for the country, but they are not forward to the monitoring of the implementation of powers. But it should have some corrective measures to like that. Then we are recommending, based on the findings, we need to conduct in the comprehensive sector diagnosis in the sector review prior to the formulation of education policies. Such studies are conducted by the NEC, even in the NEC. They are assigning in the number of the studies. Based on the studies finding, they are implementing of this the formulation of the policies, but need to have some systematic way to conducting comprehensive sector diagnosis. And also, as a country, as a system, we need to have the clear and long-term vision to the sector as well as the country. And also wider participation and the contribution of the technocrats and the stakeholders. And adequate resources we need to provide, and also in the education policies should be in the flexible, and the visionary expert need to be developed in the policy sector policies and the sector strategies. And also any policies need to have some acceptance of the audience. And we recommend to establish R&D culture, because we are not having in the sufficient, enough R&D system to promote the evidence-based policy making and the relationship between the education policies and the R&D innovation and invention. And we propose strengthen and streamline the existing policy making institution. And also we propose to establish independent council for the education policy studies. But some of the initiatives already taken, but I am not having in the much detail about. And also in the policy process, we need to follow some system. Step one in the sector diagnosis and develop green papers. Then based on the green papers views from the stakeholders and the clients, need to develop in the white paper. Those should be in the develop in the think tankers or the key academia as well as other stakeholders in the system. And based on the white paper proposal, need to have the national policy framework and then formulating the national policy on education. And also need to have some inter and intra-sectoral linkage for the education sector with regard to the policy formulation. And such policies should be built on evidence and the politically feasible and the financial realistic and agreed by the government and the relevant stakeholders, because the government wishes, government feels need to have the some sustainable of the any policies, and also in the consistency among different policies, plans and the strategies, and also in the promote standard driven and the outcome defined policy changes, and also in the systematic and the sustainable monitoring system need to identify. Those are the key areas. I mean, I'm not. You can have a look at in this publication. We can do in many different ways, but based on the, you can read and go through this document, provide your inputs and your feedback in enabling us to improve in the further steps or the further revision of this analysis. Thank you very much for the participation.